I think people underestimate the success of Danganronpa. For a relatively new franchise, it's hit levels of oversaturation and popularity that older series could only dream of. It seems that every month in Japan there's a new Danganronpa event or merch on sale. Here in the West, that popularity has seemed even faster, as the first game only hit us in 2014, unlike Japan, which has had it since 2010. In those 8 years since the first game, the series has expanded much more than just the direct sequels that followed it. And is it any surprise? Go to any con and you're almost guaranteed to see at least 10 Junko Enoshima cosplayers in any given room. How did they capitalize on this popularity? With a slew of spin-offs, adaptations, and guest appearances. So, for the first time in a while, it's time to finally delve into the novels and the games of Danganronpa. With many popular games, it's only inevitable that an anime adaptation would come along. The general idea of these adaptations is to expand the fans beyond just people who play video games, while still giving these viewers the same story and characters in a slightly different experience. Enter Danganronpa the Animation, which predates the English release of the first game by about half a year, although it wouldn't officially come to the West for another year and a half after. Fan subs meant that there was a good chance this was people's first exposure to the Danganronpa series. Animated by Studio Lurch, this 13-episode series blazes through the story of Danganronpa 1. The first red flag should be that episode count. Dividing a 20-hour story into a 4.5-hour block is going to be tough for any writer, never mind with something as word-heavy as Danganronpa. Each chapter is given exactly 2 episodes, so 40 minutes per chapter is obviously going to lead to some cuts. Almost the entirety of the investigations are cut into these tiny montages, meaning the class trials are less about the viewer figuring it out, and more about Makoto presenting the evidence to the class and the viewer. Beyond just the story, the animation is, for a game as stylistically unique as Danganronpa, this sure is a pretty bland adaptation. It reinforces something I've always thought. Danganronpa's style heavily relies on a visual novel format. It's why all of the characters in the games look like cardboard cutouts. Once you give these characters dimensions, they look a bit weird. This is only compounded by the art style shift to a much more generic anime style. The only other thing worth talking about is the dub. For the Japanese version, they kept all of the game's voice actors and they reprised their roles in the anime. However, for some reason, Funimation only decided to keep Bryce Papenbrook as Makoto and changed everyone else. The typical Funimation cast is all here. You've got Caitlin Glass and Monica Rial, along with Chris Sabat. But this dub is,
You should have seen me at the zoo when folks ignored the do not feed the bear sign!
Nuh-uh! You're a nut job and I refuse to be part of this crap!
Beg pardon?
You heard me, you psycho hairball! As far as I'm concerned, the whole trial thing can get bent!
But why? You gonna impale me on that pompadour?
Bitch! No! What I'm gonna do is tear you apart till there's nothing left but whatever's making you jabber!
The cherry on top, however, is for some reason, someone decided it was a good idea to cast Greg Aries as Monokuma. And look, I like Greg Aries, I think he's great, but anytime he opens his mouth, I can't help but hear Yamazaki from Welcome to the NHK. It's just, it's so bad.
I'm sorry, you were trying to say something?
Big mistake!
Huh?
Manhandling the principal in any way, shape, or form is strictly forbidden!
Be gone, dirty whores! Be gone, dirty whores!
Thankfully, the first game is the only one to receive an anime adaptation, and Danganronpa 3 is technically a mainline entry, so we won't be talking about it in this video. That show deserves a much different type of video to do it justice. But what we can talk about is the OVA. Danganronpa 2.5, Nagito Komaeda and the Destroyer of the World is a 25-minute OVA released alongside Danganronpa V3 in Japan, and acts as a sequel to Danganronpa 2. This is my favorite kind of spin-off because it's just complete nonsense. Essentially, Nagito, Soda, and Babyface become a very unlikely friend group, and are attempting to get Sonia to go on a date with Soda. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure, who we've definitely not seen before, is shooting mysterious men in black with finger guns? Honestly, I don't want to spoil some of the bigger parts of the OVA since it's really short, but let's just say there is, no joke, a part where Sonia shoots at Izuru with a fucking rocket launcher. You can't make this up. There's also this moment where they just reference a ton of characters, including the cast of Danganronpa 0, Ultra Despair Girls, Danganronpa 3, and a bunch of Danganronpa 1 references. Basically, this is the epitome of fan service, and I dig it. Now that the anime's all out of the way, what's next? Back into familiar territory for a minute, Danganronpa is a primarily video game franchise, so it only makes sense that this list would be quite large. Larger than a lot of people might expect. Let's get all the small ones out of the way real quick. Monokuma Strikes Back is a mobile game with a couple minigames in it. The first is a Space Invaders-like where the player shoots down projectiles. The second is a side-scroller where you play as Mondo on his bike and collect mono coins. The next one is a maths game based on Hangman's Gambit, and the final one is an Angry Birds clone. You can't play this game anymore, or at least I can't get it to work, but hey, you're not really missing much. Danganronpa Unlimited Battle is a Brick Breaker style spin-off where you have to fling chibi versions of the DR cast at obstacles to beat the level. Of course, it's got a gacha system to unlock better characters with different stats and elements, but the servers are down, so this game is also unplayable now. Alter Ego is less of a game and more of an app, but is worth mentioning. While any phone nowadays has a calendar and a clock, they don't all have a cute AI in the background while you check it, so hey, if that's your thing, then no judgment here. Alter Ego can also give you descriptions of each classmate and facts about Japan, along with having a free time section like the games. Once again, can't get this one to work, but I feel like if you're the kind of person this is made for, then you'll find a way to make it work. Whew. So, with the mobile games out of the way, let's get into the real juicy stuff. Starting with something that I wish was a bigger project. Cyber Danganronpa VR The Class Trial is a short tech demo made for the PlayStation VR, which takes place during the 4th trial of the original game. It's extremely short, however it's worth mentioning for some of these animations. While the models aren't anything to write home about, some of these are amazing. For real, each of their animations really highlights their characters, and it would be really cool to see a longer version of this, but maybe not a whole game. Another game that's more likely to have passed under your radar is even more obscure than a Japanese mobile game. How about a Japanese-only sound novel that was only released in a bundle with the 3rd Blu-ray of Danganronpa 3? Yeah, we're getting obscure. Kirigiri So is a horror sound novel which is technically 2 spin-offs in one. It's a spiritual successor to Spike Chunsoft's cult game Otogiri So, and follows an unnamed normal guy and his run-in with the ultimate detective. The story involves a creepy mansion and horror ensues, just like its predecessor. The only returning character is Kyoko, although it is the first appearance for Santa Shikiba, a character named in the first game as the ultimate botanist. Funnily enough, this is by far the most interesting spin-off to me. And if you want to learn more, then I highly recommend going to check Juiced Up 14's channel, where he reads and translates the whole VN as he goes. Juiced Up has also said that he's working on a full patch of the game, so hopefully that works out, but I wouldn't really keep my fingers crossed. Regardless, I'd love a full patch, I'd love to be able to play this, but if not, that video is the best way to go. If you do decide to delve into it, then let's just say it gets weird. Like, UFO weird. Enjoy! Finally, we get to the one everyone knows about. Danganronpa Another Episode Ultra Despair Girls is a game. Before we get into this, I want you all to know that I really wanted to like this game. It came out just after Danganronpa 2, which was a point in the series where I didn't think they could do any wrong, and it co-starred one of my favourite original Danganronpa members. I even paid for the stupid collector's edition box from Nisa. So yeah, I was pretty excited for this game. Ultra Despair Girls is an action game which follows Komaru Naegi, Makoto's sister, and her journey through Toa City. The city has been overrun by Monokumas, which are controlled by a group of little children, who are playing a killing game by hunting down adults that are trapped in the city. The game takes place after Danganronpa 1, and begins with the Future Foundation rescuing Komaru from an apartment building where she was kept captive, along with the other families of Hope's Peak students. With only the best girl Toko and a magical megaphone to guide her, she has to take down the group running the killing game and find a way back to her brother. The moment-to-moment writing is decent enough, and the focus on a smaller cast of characters allows for a lot more believable development than a normal Danganronpa game. But the actual story, on the other hand, is painfully bad. Characters appear with the express purpose of dying literally 2 minutes later. None of the villains end up being punished, and nothing really changes. Everything just continues on as if nothing happened. The saving grace is Toko and Komaru's character development, but even they can't save this game. For anyone who wants to defend this game's story, Let me remind you that there is a scene where one of the villains, who was a child, places Komaru in a tickling machine. I've never been more uncomfortable playing a video game than in this game. How about the gameplay? Well, most of the game involves fighting Monokumas or solving puzzles. You do both with your megaphone, which has some nifty features, but most of the puzzles are insanely easy and involve little thought. You can switch over to Genocider at any point once you charge her meter, which is much more action focused than Komaru. She has combos and specials and even supers, but DMC this ain't. She feels more like a Dynasty Warriors character, and most of her gameplay will involve clearing the whole screen of enemies pretty quickly. Remember what I said about Danganronpa characters looking weird in 3D? Well, you know what's worse than 2D animation? Bad 3D models. This is completely indefensible. I don't care what anyone says. Honestly, watch this clip and tell me if this is either A, a Danganronpa game, or B, a bad source filmmaker animation.
Stop that! Can you come over here? Please stop! Come on,
The single solitary thing I can say that's good about this game is of course the music, because as always the music is brilliant. Shoutouts especially to the main theme for being really weird yet really good at the same time. So that's all for video game spin-offs, but there are a couple of other things that are worth mentioning. Danganronpa has appeared in a lot of things, and I mean a lot. So instead of listing everything off ad nauseum, here's some highlights of Danganronpa's many crossovers. Crypt of the Necrodancer, an indie rhythm game, included a Danganronpa promotional event in Japan, which eventually became a free patch here in the West. The game added 8 skins to play as and a remixed version of the Danganronpa soundtrack by Masafumi Takada. Conception 2, another Spike Chunsoft game, features a special quest where the player can encounter and fight Monokuma. From what I've seen, it's a pretty disappointing fight, but it's pretty cool nonetheless.
Really? That was it? That's all we get? Monokuma got bought, but he might be a good source of get money.
A ton of Spike Chunsoft games have Danganronpa costumes, including Pixel Junk Monsters 2, Gachitora, and Mystery Chronicle One-Way Heroics. Other notable appearances include Monokuma outfits in SoniComi, and even an appearance in the Japanese version of Terraria. This is what I mean about Danganronpa being a bit of a bigger deal than people give it credit for. There was even a crossover promotion with the Japanese release of Ted. Yes, a Seth MacFarlane movie has a crossover promo with this weird Japanese visual novel. What even is this world? What do the Japanese love more than anime adaptations? Light novels, of course. For the uninitiated, a light novel is essentially a book targeted at a young demographic, that's usually fairly short and around 200 pages. If you like a Japanese game, anime, or manga, there's a good chance there are multiple light novels that you've never heard of that expand the universe. For Danganronpa, there are quite a few, so let's jump into where it all started. Danganronpa 0 is not only the first light novel, but also the first Danganronpa thing to come out after the first game. Back before Danganronpa 3 came along and decided to explain every little part of the story in excruciating detail, Kodaka wrote 2 volumes which took place before the first game. Taking place on Hope's Peak, the main character, Ryoko Otanashi, is an amnesiac klutz who has to write everything down in her memory notebook. She's unable to convert short-term memory to long-term memory, meaning every day is basically a blank slate. The story centers around a rash of mysterious deaths in Hope's Peak, and the tragedy of Hope's Peak Academy, along with Ryoko's continued run-ins with Junko Enoshima. If you've already watched Danganronpa 3, then the plot of Danganronpa 0 will seem like familiar territory in some ways. Although 0 did come out 5 years before 3, so 3 kind of lifted a lot of ideas from the novel. However, there's still a lot in 0 that isn't explored in 3, mainly the main character herself and her friend Yasuke Matsuda, who does appear in one shot in 3 in the background. The other thing this novel does is gives my girl Mukuro Ikusaba the respect she deserves, this being her first appearance outside of a costume. The steering committee and Izuru Kamakura are really important to the events of this book, which means that it foreshadows a lot of later events. It's kind of slow, but it's also really short, and personally I think the last couple chapters are worth reading the book for. And if you want to read it in English, I'll leave it in the description along with everything else that I can find. There's a couple short stories that aren't quite as long as Zero, which we'll get out of the way really quick. Danganronpa IF is a short novel which is unlocked after beating Danganronpa 2. It's an alternate version of the first game's story, where Makoto discovers the escape button before anyone is murdered, which leads to Junko's plans being ruined. Mukuro is the main character, as she survives Junko's attempt at her life, and decided to help the others escape. This story is all about Mukuro, which means it's all good in my book, and it's got some pretty good character interactions that you never normally see. There's some non-canon parts to it, like Chihiro apparently creating the program for Monokuma, but other than that, it's mostly just fan service fun. Continuing the tradition of Blu-ray bundles, a short story called Makoto Naegi The Secret File was bundled with the first Blu-ray of Danganronpa 3. This barely 20-page story recounts the day that Makoto got accepted to Hope's Peak as the ultimate lucky student. It's basically a story about a bunch of unlucky things happening which leads to a very lucky event. Once again, it's not quite required reading, but if you've ever wondered how Makoto would handle a hostage situation, then go nuts. Next, we've got a story about one of the most overlooked Danganronpa survivors, Ultra Despair Hagakure. Unlocked after beating Ultra Despair girls, the story is a parallel version of the main story, with Yasuhiro tagging along to Toa City just like Toko, and meeting another relative of a Killing Game member with a hacking megaphone. The person he meets is Kanon Nakajima, cousin of Leon Kuwata. This one is definitely a bit strange. For the most part, it's just a story about Hiro and Kanon trying to escape Toa City, while being attacked by the Warriors of Hope every now and then. Kanon, however, is a very interesting character. This one's also very short, so I won't talk about it too in depth, but let's just say that her love for her cousin Leon is a lot more than just familial. This one's definitely not canon because in the end, Hiro decides to stay in Toa City, but in Danganronpa 3, he's seen running around outside the Killing Game, so hey, even if it's not the best, at least it's not particularly important either. Danganronpa 1.2 Beautiful Days is a light novel that I was iffy about whether or not to include in this video. It's an anthology book, a collection of fan-submitted short stories and comics that was published in 2014. About half the stories are about Danganronpa 1 and the other half are about Danganronpa 2, and the stories are separated by some short 4-koma style fan comics. It's a pretty interesting book, and has been fully translated, so if you want to see what the Japanese fanbase think of the Danganronpa characters, then this is a pretty good insight. It's basically a fanzine, but official, so it's pretty cool. There are 2 more light novel series to talk about, and despite them being the longest by a long shot, they're also the least translated, so I haven't had a chance to read them yet, but we can still most definitely talk about them. Danganronpa Kirigiri is an ongoing light novel series focusing on a fan-favorite character, Kyoko Kirigiri. There's already 6 volumes, and it's not over yet, making this by far the longest light novel in the series. Unlike Zero, this one isn't written by Kodaka. Takekuni Kitayama is a famous Japanese mystery author, who also wrote Kirigiri-so, which we discussed earlier, and The Murders from Danganronpa V3. The novels are written from the perspective of a girl named Yui Samidare, a detective working in the same agency as Kyoko. The novels seem to all take place before the events of the game, explaining how Kyoko uses her talents as the ultimate detective. Unfortunately, there's no way for me to get really in-depth into this since I haven't read them. However, there are summaries of the first 2 books by Great Blaster on Tumblr. There is a partly translated version by Kamase Megane, which I'll link in the description again. However, it's only most of the first volume and seems to be on indefinite hiatus. The final story for us to talk about is another character-centric spin-off, this time for everyone's favorite dickhead. Danganronpa Togami is a 3-volume long light novel that takes place between the events of the first and the second game, although it really doesn't matter since this is the most non-canon fanfiction I have ever read. From what I can gather, the story takes place somewhere in the Czech Republic, and involves Shinobu Togami, who's the ultimate secretary, following Byakuya around and writing a novel about him. The book starts with Byakuya getting his identity stolen, and Shinobu writing about how attractive he is. She's basically just a rip-off of Toko, to the point where I thought she was Toko until they mention her name a couple pages in. The remnants of despair are the main villains, and the ultimate imposter is the one who stole Byakuya's identity, so Byakuya has to stop them. The first volume is entirely translated, once again by Kamase Megane, but this one is... like with Kirigiri, I don't quite fancy reading part of the story that I'll never be able to finish. And from what I've seen of this one, it gets very weird. So that's all the light novels. But we still have a big section to get to. You could make an entire 30-minute video on all the different Danganronpa manga, so instead we're going to do a super quick lightning round of the important ones. 2 adaptations of Danganronpa 1 exist. The first is a cancelled, unfinished manga which shows the events of Danganronpa 1, but this time the perspective switches between the victims and the murderers, giving certain characters a lot more focus and attention, but it was never finished for some reason. The second one is Danganronpa The Animation, the manga, which is exactly what it sounds like. This is a more straightforward adaptation and tells the story as it was originally told, and is completely translated by Dark Horse. Back to Japanese exclusive bundles, the very first release of Danganronpa on PSP came with a short manga, which adapted the demo of the first game. For those unfamiliar, the demo has a different trial to prevent spoilers, which involves Yasuhiro being murdered by Hifumi. This one's very rare, but it's an extremely cool piece of pre-order bonus. Next we have the absolutely cursed Danganronpa 2 Ultimate Luck and Hope and Despair. This adaptation follows the story of DR2 from the perspective of everyone's favourite cryptid, Nagito Komaeda. If you're one of those people who can't get enough of Komaeda's Ugu antics, then you'll be happy to know Dark Horse are also releasing this in English, so enjoy it, you creeps. On the same vein, we've got the story of Danganronpa 2, but from Chiaki's perspective. This one has a way cutesier art style and is for people with only the most refined tastes. For real, it's exactly what it says in the tin. Next. You'll never guess, but there's also 2 adaptations of Ultra Despair Girls as well. The first is a straight adaptation, and the second is from the perspective of Toko. They really love these perspective switches. These 2 are a lot harder to find info on, but there are scanlations out there, so if you want to read them, then good luck. There are approximately 1 million 4-Koma anthology collections of the series, which are basically a collection of short comedy comics. You've got your cute ones, your funny ones, your romance ones, and all of them are chock full of Japanese-centric humor and will probably never be officially translated. You can find a lot of the comics translated if you jump around a lot, but they're not compiled in one place. Phew. So, with those out of the way, let's talk about something that's not just a manga adaptation of something else, but actually has a really interesting story behind it. In 2016, a little manga called Killer Killer began serialization, written by Kodaka and drawn by Mitomo Sasako. While Kodaka's name would set off some red flags, the art style is so split from Danganronpa that it seemed to be a completely new work. That was until Chapter 3, when the full title, Danganronpa Gaiden Killer Killer, was revealed. The story takes place before Danganronpa 2 and involves the Future Foundation's attempts to stop the spread of despair. The manga was only 14 chapters long, and its true purpose was to set up the characters and events of the Danganronpa 3 anime. The art is quite nice, and it's a short read, so while it may not be required reading, I think it does add a lot to 3 especially. If you ever felt the characters in 3 were underdeveloped or weirdly executed, then Gaiden gives you at least a slightly bigger insight into them. And with that, we're done, right? That's all the spin-offs. Right? Have you ever been playing Danganronpa and thought, this is good and all, but I think it's really missing a human element that would help me connect to the characters more? Well, you're in luck. Danganronpa 1, 2, and 3 have all been adapted into stage plays by a company called Cornflakes? I'm very confused. They're hard to find, but honestly, they're a trip. They're hammy in that special way that only stage plays can be, and it's only compounded by the ancient Japanese art of overacting everything. Big props to the wardrobe department especially for having their hands full with this one, and still managing to deliver some decent outfits. And with that, we can finally bring this video to a close. When I started researching this video, I really didn't think it would go on this long. I kind of underestimated how much there was, but here we are. Overall, Danganronpa is a series that's very close to my heart, and although my love for it has waned over the years, with the release of V3 it's reclaimed the spot as one of my favourite series of all time. So with this much extra material to go through, I don't think I'm gonna run out of anything Danganronpa related for a long time, even if they never release another mainline game ever again. Once again, all the English translations that I could find are linked in the description. And if anyone speaks Japanese and wants to try cracking out one of these light novels, then I'd be eternally grateful. So to end this video, let's let the dulcet tones of the Danganronpa 2 stage play us out.
届けこの想い
Hey guys, thanks for watching so much. This video is super long, so I'm going to make this outro super short. If you want to see more of my stuff, then stick around. We're coming up to October, which means that it's spooky month, which I've got a couple plans for, which I'll keep under wraps until then. If you want to join the Discord and come send memes and chat, there's a link in the description. If you want to come watch me play games on Twitch, I'm at twitch.tv/cicadawave. Right now we're finishing the DMC series and playing through Sly Cooper. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at cicada_wave. I just kind of tweet bullshit all the time. A lot of Danganronpa stuff though. If you're into Danganronpa, Twitter is the best place. So yeah, again, not going to talk anymore. Thanks for watching. This was a really big edit, and I'll see you when I see you, I suppose. Thank you again.